Okay, good evening, everyone. Welcome to this Police and Crime Panel confirmation hearing on Wednesday, the 22nd of February. For clarification for the public, this is not a selection or interview process, as that has already taken place by the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner. This panel has a statutory responsibility to satisfy itself that the selection and protocols employed by the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner have met the statutory thresholds. So the Police and Crime Commissioner's recommendation is that the Police and Crime Panel support the appointment of Phil Wells as the Financial Officer for the Office of Police and Crime Commissioner. So that's our purpose tonight. So moving on to the agenda proper. Item 1 on the agenda is to receive apologies for absence.
Yeah, we've received quite a number of apologies with the short notice of the meeting. So with apologies from councillors Caswell, Dodwell, Donnellan, Gom and Oaz, and from independent member Mr Melville.
Okay, thank you, Jeremy. Item 2 on the agenda is the disclosure of local and/or disclosable pecuniary interests. Members are reminded that where they have a local and/or disclosable pecuniary interest under their authorities code, the conduct in any business of the council to be considered at this meeting, they must disclose the existence and nature of that interest at the commencement of that consideration, or when the interest becomes apparent in accordance with your council's code of conduct. Moving on to agenda item 3, we'd like to welcome Phil Wells, who this is all about this evening. So welcome, Phil.
Thank you.
I'd like panel members to introduce themselves so the public are aware who we are, and I think Phil probably knows who we are, but I think we should go ahead. My name is Jim Weir. I'm a Bedford Borough councillor.
I'm Neil Bunyan. I'm a Central Beds councillor, Flitwick Ward.
I'm Councillor Gareth Mackey, also Central Bedfordshire Flitwick Ward.
Paul Downing, independent member.
Hangir Ahmed, Legal Services.
And I'm Jeremy Welsh, the support officer for the committee.
You know these 4 people down the other end, I guess.
I've met them once or twice.
Yeah. Okay. Item 4 on the agenda is to outline the format of the meeting, which I will ask Jeremy to do.
Well, the format's fairly straightforward. First of all, I need to confirm that the Commissioner has supplied the information that was required by the Act in respect of the candidate. So next step is that the Chair will invite panel members to ask questions of the candidate. And when all the questions have been asked, the Chair will invite the candidate to clarify any responses that they wish to make. At that point, then the hearing will be concluded and it cease to be a public meeting, and the panel will then in private make its deliberations and provide a report to the Commissioner at the latest within 7 days, but I'm sure an awful lot earlier than that.
Okay, thank you, Jeremy, for that. So moving on to item 5 then, which is the proposed appointment of the Chief Finance Officer of the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner. And as Jeremy said, the 2 documents that were in the panel's rolling confirming the appointment and the Commissioner's report of the appointment, well, I know have been read by all of us. So it's now really up to panel members to ask questions. And if you don't mind, I'll start as rolling with the first question, Phil. And obviously, we as a power are aware of your qualifications, but for the benefit of the public who may be listening now or at some stage in the future when this is published, can you explain what qualifications you hold that qualify you for the role of CFO within the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner, and explain the role of the Chief Financial Officer as you see it in relation to the responsibilities of Section 151 of the Local Government Act, please?
Yep, I can do that, Chair. So Section 151 of the Local Government Act 1972 requires a person who has administration of financial affairs to hold what they call a membership with one of the consultative committee of accounting bodies, which is generally a chartered accountancy qualification. I'm a member and have been now for about 25 years of the Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy, which is CIPFA for short, which is one of those CCAB bodies. In terms of the role is quite neatly defined in a SIPFA document for the role of the Chief Finance Officer in policing. And it brings into 5 principles, really. One is about being part of the PCC's leadership team. One is about being able to bring influence to all material business decisions that the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner makes. One is to present and lead good financial management and promote that. One is to ensure that the finance function is fit for purpose and take responsibility for that. And another one is to be qualified, which I've just articulated that I am. And generally, the role is to ensure that the financial affairs of the Office of Police and Crime Commissioner are conducted in a professional and appropriate way. If that helps, Chair.
Okay, that's fantastic. Thank you. Excuse me. I'll ask you one more question, Phil, and I'll open it up to the panel. There are potential conflicts of interest in relation to the role of the Chief Financial Officer within both the force and the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner. You will be part of describing what the police force needs budget-wise, no doubt, and agreeing and challenging with your OPCC hat on what it should have. How would you deal with that? And before you answer that, I know that you held the role before and dual roles before. Did your time working at the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner under previous Police and Crime Commissioners highlight any conflicts which you could be aware of?
So I guess from a perspective of a CFO, to be able to do the dual role, both the PCC and the Chief Constable needs to be on the same page. And I think our PCC and our Chief Constable at the moment have the same values and philosophy around protecting the public. And on that basis, their vision and views are aligned. That makes my role as a CFO a lot simpler. However, what it won't mean is that there will never be a conflict of interest between the two, because as exactly what you've just outlined, Councillor, which is that the Chief Constable will always, because we see ever increasing demand in Bedfordshire, want more resource, and the Commissioner will not have the ability to provide him with that. So I've done the role in various guises now since 2008, and what I've always found is that the PCC might not like to hear this while he's sitting there, but there is a little bit of education needed on both sides, and it's educating around long-term need versus short-term gain. And from the Commissioner's perspective, he will always need to be looking at 3, 4, 5 years hence, and sometimes that will go against the grain of what the Chief Constable is looking for. But to have those simple conversations, sit them both down, understand each party's view, but draw out the financial principles around good financial management for both organisations, and also make sure that we're looking at the medium-term plan around those, I think has always stood us in good stead and got us into a good position. And I'm fairly confident that doing the role for both parties, that will always be the case moving forward.
Smashing. Thank you very much for that. That's quite comprehensive and gives some reassurance. Before I open up to the panel, can I just ask you to explain, because this is a public meeting and the public may be watching, why you are appearing remotely rather than with us in person?
Yes, apologies, Chair. I tested positive for COVID on Monday, and I didn't feel it was the right thing to do to come and share that with you today. So I decided to dial in, if that's okay.
Thanks very much for that. Appreciate it. Gentlemen.
Good evening, Phil. I'm going to hurl a load of acronyms at you now in the interest of brevity. You've been integral to the development of the PBB within the force. Now, what approach would you take to review the MTFP of the OPCC?
Okay, I can try and address that, and just for if there are any public watching, I will try and just elaborate on some of those abbreviations. But simply put, the medium-term financial plan for the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner needs to be balanced, it needs to be understood, and it needs to be linked with the funding that we receive as an overall organisation, both Force and Police and Crime Commissioner. The PBB, which is priority-based budgeting, we've brought into the Force because it helps us understand every activity that the Force undertake. And there are a significant amount of activities that the general public may not properly understand that the Force undertake. And that will be the case for the Office of Police and Crime Commissioner as well. It's not just one activity that office undertakes, there are numerous activities. And my proposal will be that I will take that process into the OPCC, and we will have a full priority-based budgeting process within the OPCC so that they have the same budget process as the Force, so that when we are considering the budget on an annual basis, both organisations are considering their budget in the same way. And I think that will stand us in good stead.
So you'll be reviewing it on a rolling basis, as it were?
Yes, it will be an annual review on the basis that our funding, as awkward as it is only guaranteed for 1 year at a time.
No, thanks very much.
Well, Phil, in the role profile, it talks about the CFO must lead and direct a finance function that is resourced to be fit for purpose. What does that look like to you?
So for me, that is making sure that we have the right number of qualified individuals within that team. And the team that currently exists, that it has 3 qualified accountants in it, as well as myself. And I think that's sufficient for the size of the team that we have. It also requires to have strong internal controls and strong internal systems. And I ensure through our internal audit process that those systems that are used by that finance function are audited on an annual basis. And I'm pleased to say that our audit opinions on those systems are always positive. And it also requires to ensure that we have the ability in the finance function to be able to keep non-finance people within the organisation up to date with changes and be able to help them understand how they control their budgets, which I think we do really well within Bedfordshire Police, and I think we do really well within the OPCC.
Okay, so is that right? There's 3 qualified accountants in the OPCC?
Sorry, so the finance team sits within the Force, but they provide the service to the OPCC, and I will oversee that team as I do now.
Okay, all right, thank you for that. So it kind of leads on, because you talked about audit there. Could you just explain, and this is every day is a school day for people around this table, but can you just explain what your role is in leading audit, and tell us a bit about how your relationship is with the Joint Audit Committee? And you might want to just tell us a bit about the Joint Audit Committee.
Okay, if I deal with the audit bit first, then I'll come back to the Joint Audit Committee. So 2 types of audit: internal audit and external audit. And if I deal with internal audit first, so I guess my role around internal audit is, or my approach around it is, a fairly simplistic one, which is their work, as I just mentioned, should focus on anything that may impact on the internal financial control environment within the organisation, and whether that be the Force or the OPCC. And I ensure that they look at that on a regular basis, at least annually. And then anything else that I feel from our internal control perspective will impact on the PCC delivering his police and crime plan, I will ask the internal auditors to look at for us. Now, the reason I do that is because there's no point asking an internal auditor to come in to look at controls that I know are working really well. What I want them to do is come in and look at areas that I think we've got a weakness in, but I need them to just clarify that for me. So usually their internal audit will be very linked to our risk register process. And we do that for the Force and for the OPCC. In terms of external audit, as just mentioned around the finance team, I wouldn't see that changing too much in terms of the relationship I've got at the moment, because the majority of the work that is done for both the force and the OPCC in relation to the work that's subject to external audit is done within my finance team. And we've got dedicated resource in there that just focus on the annual accounts of the OPCC and the force. And they are the lead person that deals with the external auditors. And I've been dealing with external auditors now for Bedfordshire Police since year 2000. So 23 years of dealing with the external auditors. I pretty much have a good relationship with all the auditors that come in on the basis that I'm fairly transparent and fairly open and happy to work with them in terms of anything that they think is reasonable that they want to interrogate. I'll give them the transparency to have a look at it and come back to us and review the controls around that. And most auditors that I've dealt with appreciate that openness in terms of the ability for them to scrutinise our work. So I wouldn't see that changing too much. In terms of the Joint Audit Committee, I've been the lead officer for our Joint Audit Committee, which is a committee made up of independent members that are there. Their job is to review what the officers are doing around financial controls, risk registers and governance that could impact either the PCC delivering his police and crime plan or the Chief Constable delivering his annual plan. So they are like a governance mechanism for those two individuals and provide assurance or non-assurance to those two individuals. I was involved in the inception of our Joint Audit Committee back in 2012. I actually think the audit committee we've got at the moment is strong in terms of what I've always tried to do is make sure that the members bring different qualities. So they're not all financially based. Some of our private sector based, some of them have been in public service before, some of them have got audit experience. So all of the terms of reference that sits within the audit committee, we have a member that's got some specialism linked to those terms of reference. And again, I think, I hope they would say this, that what they get from me as a CFO into that audit committee is transparency, happy to report on anything that they ask, openness, and willing to accept any criticism that they feel is appropriate and provide answers where they're required.
That's very informative, Phil. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Chair. Phil, I think I can probably speak for all panel members that were there for the pre-briefing that we received before the PCC presented his budget for the year to the panel. Could we have your assurance that you will continue those? And how do you feel that you could perhaps enhance financial understanding that the panel has of the operation of the OPCC in terms of its budget and its financial issues?
Yes, I think from my perspective, I am not convinced, and I never have been, that you can put the detail that everybody needs to be able to scrutinise the finance of the OPCC or the force in a report, because I just don't think you can get the level of detail in a report that allows you to scrutinise what's written in there. So I will happily continue before any financial paper that comes to your panel. I'll be happy to set up one-to-ones or meetings with you as a focus group to talk through the detail, because I think what that allows you to do is then ask more pertinent questions at the panel. And I think that is your role, and I need to give you the ability to do that. So absolutely happy to carry those on. And I think linked to the previous question around the proposal of bringing priority-based budgeting into the OPCC, I think that would be a really useful area for you as a panel member to understand and see the product of that. And again, I'd happily do that and walk you through the detail of it once it's been through the process.
Fantastic. Anybody else?
I've only got one further question, if I may, and it's in relation to your application, Phil, and this is your leadership role that you know, clearly you've got already, and you're walking into another leadership role. You've said in your, I think it's your submission, I take responsibility for helping to ensure the emotional well-being of those in my teams. I take the responsibility to deal with any inappropriate behaviours. Can you give us an example of doing that?
So,
Without being
fortunately,
specific about no.
yeah. Fortunately, in terms of, sorry,
Sorry,
What's it
Phil,
say?
that just a lift from the personal qualities in the role profile.
yep, that's fine.
Oh, right.
That's what we discussed.
Sorry, Phil. I'm talking at cross purposes. I thought this was a document that you'd filled in to tell us how great you were.
This is what I needed.
I'll
This
give that to her.
is what I needed
But
to
yeah,
demonstrate.
don't worry. Don't worry. I'll withdraw that question.
But just to put it on record, you know, there are processes within the OPCC, there are processes within the force that if there is any wrongdoing from any side, that I will follow those processes, and I expect those processes to be followed against me if there was any wrongdoing against me.
Yeah, one more, please, Phil. What do you see as the challenges and opportunities within the and the OPCC budgets? In fact, how will you deal with financial challenges if the force and the PCC views are not aligned?
Right, what time are we due to finish?
When we finish.
Your briefest answer if possible, Phil. Use acronyms.
Yeah. I think the biggest challenge, to be fair, and it's one that affects all public service, and it affects the Commissioner and the Chief in no different way, is we run multi-million pound organisations with no understanding what level of resources we're going to get year on year. And that makes it really difficult for anybody to do some long-term financial planning, because you're always working on guesswork beyond year one. And that is really difficult. And it's really difficult for you as a panel as well to really understand, have that ability to say, what does the longevity look like around the PCC's plans? So that's our most probably biggest challenge. I think our next biggest challenge beyond that is the way that the funds are allocated in the first place. There is talk around a funding formula. Well, I can tell you there hasn't been a funding formula since 2013. And the one that was in place prior to 2013 never met Bedfordshire Police's needs in the first place. And as a result of that, both the Commissioner and the Chief Constable have been operating in a financial environment in trying to deliver their police and crime plan in their annual plan without the resources that they actually need and desire. So our drive is to make sure that that funding formula, which is being reviewed and we're told will be consulted on this year, is driven in the needs of Bedfordshire Police, and we'll make sure we do that. And I will make sure that where anything comes out into the organisation, whether it be the force or the OPCC, that we will be part of that discussion around that funding formula. And then beyond that, because that deals with your revenue, capital funding, the Commissioner receives no Home Office funding for capital. So all of his capital expenditure is either funded through contributions from his revenue budget, which we've just said he hasn't got enough of, sales, so that's usually capital sales, that's sales of vehicles, sales of property, sales of ICT kit, or borrowing. They are his routes to funding, and none of those are overly popular. So our challenge is making sure that our capital funding is limited to what we can afford, but also that we generate as much funding as we possibly can to make sure that where we do need to invest in capital, we're not drawing on our revenue budget. And then finally, Chair, if I may, reserves. We are not blessed with high levels of reserves in Bedfordshire. which is mostly linked to the three areas I just covered previously. And we will always need to look at where we can try and deliver underspends year on year. We will always be looking at trying to put those into reserves to give the PCC some longevity, as you were seeing this year when he set the 23-24 budget, to be able to balance the needs of the force with some certainty around funding. And I think they're most probably the four key areas, Chair.
Thank you, Phil. Panel, any further questions? I've just got one, maybe to pick up on what Gareth said earlier. The panel attended the meeting you held to describe the budget early February, which was extremely useful, and we all found it useful. And I just wondered, moving on maybe to a half-year position, whether I'm sure you produce management reports, but is it possible that the panel can see where you're tracking, where the budget is tracking here, and maybe a presentation on that? And also, I don't know when you start drafting the budget. I guess as soon as you know what's going to be available, but maybe earlier than we see it now would be give us more time to maybe look at it a bit longer, discuss it amongst ourselves, and go back with more pertinent questions rather than, you know, the other. Is that possible?
Chair, I think a panel, informal panel around about September time, October time, which gives you the ability to understand what our medium-term plan thinking is, as well as what the half-year position is, would be really useful. And then a similar one to which we did this year in December, when we know a bit more detail around the funding, just to give you some heads up on what the budget is potentially looking like. I think those two panels would be really useful for you.
Thank you. That's absolutely brilliant. That's great stuff. I'm sure we'll all be appreciate that. Phil, I think we're out of questions now. I think you've answered everything fully, and you know, lots of information back into that, and giving it with confidence. Is there anything you want to ask us? Is there anything you want to sum up or say, or before we come to the end of the meeting?
No, I think just thank you for the opportunity, and thanks for the. I was going to say thanks for the questions. I'm not sure if that's right, but thanks for the questions. Made me think a little bit, but hopefully I gave you some assurance in terms of my knowledge and experience, particularly in policing, but also in the force and the OPCC. And, you know, what's important for me around finance is that bit around making sure that everybody that is looking at it has the understanding of it. So that relationship between myself and you as a panel, I think, will be really important moving forward, and those informal meetings will help that, and absolutely happy to do those as well as one-to-ones, Chair. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Well, that's good news, and we appreciate that as we move forward, and make a speedy recovery, please. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Whether we switch him off now or whether he doesn't.
The next thing is to exclusion of the public, Chair,
Yeah.
which is you've got the script for, I think.
So we've got to the point now where we will discuss it as a panel. Do we have to resolve to exclude the public? I'll read this out. The Local Government Act 1972, Schedule 12A, as amended, is to the exclusion of the public, so that we consider whether to pass a resolution under Section 100A, brackets 4 of the Local Government Act 1972 to exclude the public from the remainder of the meeting on the grounds that consideration of the following items of business are likely to involve the disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraphs 1 and 3 of Part 1 of Schedule 12A to the Act as amended. Can I have a show of hands?
Yeah.
Thank you. Not unanimous. So we could ask the members, the Commissioner.
At this point, we're going to say goodbye to you, Phil.
Okay. Good night. Thank you very much.
Good night.
Welcome, by the way, the office of the police.
I'll do that.